So what's the future looking like for Australia's economy? Well, to find out more, I spoke with Steve Keen, who is crowdfunding his non-mainstream research into economics via Patreon. He started by discussing how close the country actually is to a recession.
Well, if you take a look at the GDP per capita, it's been in a recession for 1 or 2 years. The only reason that GDP is still rising, the only reason, but a major reason why, is the large amount of population growth through the largest immigration program per capita on the planet. And when you take that out of the equation and say what is the actual level of GDP per capita, it's actually been falling for about 2 years.
Now, the weak economic growth has led to growing calls for interest rate cuts from Australia's central bank, but they decided to leave rates unchanged at 1%. What's your take, not just on their commentary, but sort of the outlook for future rate cuts there?
Well, I think I've been saying for some time that I expect the rates to head towards zero for the same reason they have in the rest of the world after the global financial crisis. The only reason that Australia avoided a serious recession then was by restarting its housing bubble. So for quite some substantial time, it's been relying both on its minerals exports and on a housing bubble. And the housing bubble, which is financed by mortgage debt, has driven Australian household debt levels to the second highest in the world. The only country with a higher level of household debt to GDP is Switzerland, and those figures may involve a large amount of international money hiding itself there. So the debt burden is enormous. As a result of that, consumers aren't spending. Consumer spending has been falling for quite some time now. And the only things that are propping the economy up are completely out of the blue trade surplus, courtesy of very strong growth in prices for basic minerals, a fall in imports as well, and then government spending. If you took government spending out of the equation, the economy would actually have gone backwards in the last quarter.
So what's your take on the government strategy as to how they're handling some of these economic headwinds, and what more would you like to see done?
Well, the interesting irony is that if you look at how GDP is defined, it's defined as being consumption plus investment plus exports minus imports plus government spending minus taxes, which tells you that if government spending is greater than taxes, GDP actually rises. Now, that's an obvious fact in every economic textbook, but governments around the world, including the Australian government, are obsessed with the belief that they're actually like a household, and they think like a household they should spend less than they earn, therefore they think they should tax more than they spend. If they tax more than they spend, they actually reduce GDP, which is what they're trying to increase. Now, the Australian government is classically doing just that. It's trying to run a surplus, and by running a surplus, it's actually reducing demand in the economy. So I'd rather them wake up and realise that they actually don't have any possibility of running out of money. Households can run out of dollars, that the Australian government can't run out of Australian dollars. It should be boosting that spending, but it should also be trying to develop the country's industries, and it's neglected those very badly in the last 10 to 15 years.
And let's actually take a look back, because we saw that former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd really steered the Australian economy during the global financial crisis. Are there any lessons that can be learned, not just from the stimulus that was used then, but perhaps anything that might apply now?
Well, I think that's a good point, because Australia would have gone into recession along with the rest of the OECD had it not been for the scale of the Rudd stimulus. And that was the basic philosophy behind that was expressed by the then Treasury Secretary, which was go hard, go early, and go households to stimulate the economy. And it was successful. The only problem was they also included in that doubling and trebling the amount of money the government gave to first-home people buying their first home, which actually restarted the housing bubble. And that was the main factor that got the economy over the global financial crisis. But of course, it did it by raising levels of household debt. So it shows that government spending can have a positive impact. But if it's done just to restart a housing bubble, ultimately end up again in the same doldrums that Australia was trying to avoid. The real focus is on using that government's capacity to restart investment inside the economy, and that, I'm afraid, I don't think the Australian government is going to take that lesson.
And I do quickly want to look at two of Australia's biggest trading partners and the two biggest economies in the world. You have the US and China. And right now they're embroiled in a trade war with no end in sight. How is that impacting Australia's economy?
Well, Australia is the main source of Australia's export growth has been exports to China. Particularly over the last 10 years, ever since China actually gave itself a credit bubble back in 2010 to try to stimulate its economy after the downturn of exports with the global financial crisis. So that's been very successful for Australia, but it hasn't done much to improve its value added of the minerals. And so it's very much reliant on China's continuing growth. America is less relevant. America is more a source of imports into Australia rather than exports from Australia. So in that sense, economically, Australia's future is tied to China. But actually the way the government is behaving is kowtowing to the Americans rather than kowtowing to the Chinese.